Title for this morning, Godly Sorrow, Worldly Sorrow. Godly Sorrow, Worldly Sorrow. It's the only place in the Bible that the phrase godly sorrow is used. So let's listen, let's have our ears open to what this might be about. Sorrow, as you know, is painful. Some of you might be feeling sorrow this very morning. If so, it's vital that you hear me now, right at the beginning. This sermon is not about sorrow, grief that arises through no fault of our own. Many illnesses come upon us. Mental illnesses come upon us. Many losses we suffer in life, including loss of loved ones. Please don't fall into that trap this morning. I would call it a dodgy theological trap. That God is inflicting such sorrow upon you because of some hidden sin, or because he's having a bad hair day, or because he's a little bit bored and attention-seeking, because he wants you to look to him, because he wants you to feel guilty, with no end in sight. That is all indications that we need a theological health check, if that's where we're going. This sermon, and indeed this chapter, is about sorrow that we do bring upon ourselves. Sorrow that means we cause grief to ourselves or sometimes to other people. It could be within family, it could be within church, it could be to strangers. Quite simply, it is when we live in a way which is not best for us, not the best that God intends for you and me. A little example to clarify where we're going. As a teenager, believe it or not, I went to a party I remember very well in the countryside in Kent, and I drank far too much beer. I was very ill that night. And in the morning, I had a very sore head, and I felt very, very sorry for myself. That was my fault. I remember waking up and saying, never again. I had the opportunity to change my drinking habits. Sadly, it took a bit longer than my teens. But on the other hand, as a teenager, there were times when I experienced deep anxiety. A social phobia came in my late teens, which caused a lot of personal sorrow and an intense pain in my head and in my heart. And that was through no fault of my own. It just happened. It wasn't about changing behaviour, it was about getting help. Sadly, that help took a long time coming as well, or I sought it after a number of years. Let me reiterate. We're focusing this morning on behaviour that is chosen, habits that we get into, and those things that end in sorrow, grief, sadness, pain for ourselves and for others. Now this can be seen, I suggest, as godly sorrow if, with God's help, we do something about it. The word that Paul uses is if we repent. The Greek word means, metanoia means the changing of our thinking, the changing of our minds, which then can lead, with God's help, to the change in direction. He also uses the word salvation. We are saved from a life like that. We are saved from that kind of pain, you could say. Please, not now, but please at some stage have a reread through the poem that is in the news sheet today and see if you can relate some of this to the poem. But on the other hand, that's godly sorrow. If we simply feel sorry for ourselves because we're suffering the pain and sorrow as a result of something we have done or failed to do, that is worldly sorrow. It is worldly sorrow when we don't let God in, when we don't allow God to bring about that ongoing transformation in us through that sorrow. It is a sorrow that sucks life from us. In Paul's polemic kind of writing, where he goes to extremes in his writing, he says that is a sorrow that leads to death. We've learnt already that in Corinthians, Paul founded this church, then he went away for a time, and whilst he was away, the church was led astray by the super apostles, and there was dissension in the church. They turned against Paul. You could say they turned against God because Paul was God's person. When they turned against him, they were turning against God as well. They became selfish. Instead of saving up money and giving it to churches in Jerusalem that needed it because of their poverty and the tough times they were going through, they held on to their money. They became rather worldly. And as a result, Paul wrote, not 1 Corinthians, not 2 Corinthians, but as Peter calls it, 1.5 Corinthians, the letter which is now lost. He wrote a harsh letter to them. And this is the letter that's referred to in verse 8 that caused sorrow. My letter hurt you. Although he makes clear that hurt, that sorrow was not his primary intention. And we see this in the fact that Paul then says he was joyful because they felt sorrow, and not just because they felt sorrow, but because that sorrow led to repentance, metanoia, a change of thinking, a change of direction, getting back on track. That is the difference between godly sorrow and worldly sorrow. He sums up in verse 11, see what this godly sorrow has produced in you. What earnestness, what eagerness to clear yourselves. What indignation, what alarm, what longing, what concern, what readiness to see justice done. For example, financing and helping other people in need. Another very clear example of the difference between godly sorrow and worldly sorrow. Think about Jesus' arrest. Think about Peter and others deserting him. Think about Peter being asked if he was a follower of Jesus and him denying that he knew Jesus. Well, when the cock then crowed, Peter remembered what Jesus had said and he wept. He repented. Metanoia, he changed his thinking, he changed his direction. And then we see the beautiful restoration when Jesus meets him after the resurrection. Compare that godly sorrow to Judas, the one who betrayed Jesus. We hear in Matthew that he also felt a sorrow, but it seems to be more about a wretchedness and a sorrow about the implications, the results for himself, and it led to him hanging himself. That is more of a worldly sorrow. That's other people. The opportunity for you and me this morning is to examine our own hearts. What behaviour, what habits might there be in your life, in my life, that lead to or might lead to sorrow or grief, either for you or for other people? And might also cause sorrow to God's heart. And not in this way that is often preached, oh, you're offending God. God is going to zap you because of this you're doing. No, God has sorrow because he loves you. And because it is not the best for you when you fall into that behaviour and thinking. First point I'd like to emphasise this morning, again, please listen up to this. Everyone struggles with something. Everyone struggles with something. That is, everybody struggles, in Paul's words that he uses in Romans, in our inner being. We all have a wrestling with something within our inner person. In Romans chapter 7, verse 18, Paul goes on to say, for I have a desire, this is him, this is this wonderful person used by God in his imperfection. I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep doing. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? And he goes on to give the answer. It is Jesus who delivers me. Let's face it, every single person in this room, every single person out there, I believe, has some good in them. It can be very hidden sometimes, but we are all made in the image of God. There is something left of that in each of us. But we all do stuff that either hurts ourselves or hurts other people. Some of it is obvious. and is often spoken about. Things like alcohol, excess alcohol use, money-grabbing behaviour, drug use, greed, excessive gambling. They're the obvious ones, which are very real, actually very real for many Christians as well. But then the less obvious ones, gossip, having a critical tongue, self-centered behaviour, a bitterness of heart that leads to bitter kind of actions towards others, pride that overflows in not very nice relational behaviour, angry outbursts, or even more subtle, being passive-aggressive. I'll do it then. You fill in the blank. If none of this applies to you, you might want to go for coffee now because the rest of the sermon won't be relevant to you either. Secondly, everyone, including you and me, can be blind to our something. Even when we feel sorrow as a result of it, even when we feel pain, even when we are grieved because of something linked to what we have done, we can still turn a blind eye to it. We can remain unaware, we can have it very far down in our subconscious, so we don't know exactly what's going on and why these repercussions are coming our way. We are very good at denial. We often carry on regardless. We fall down the same hole again and again and again. Sometimes we don't see the hole, we just fall down. Sometimes we actually see the hole and we fall down anyway. Again, read the poem after the service. We can justify our behaviour. Well, I did this, I do this because. Or we can blame other people for what we've done, none of which is healthy. So what is the suggested way forward? I would suggest that this stuff within us needs to be brought into the light. You could say that God, maybe through somebody else in another way, will hold a mirror up to us so that we can see ourselves more clearly. In Paul's lost letter, 1.5, lost letter to the Corinthians, this is exactly what was happening. God, through Paul, was bringing into the light that which was going on wrong within the church in Corinth. You could say that it was the cock crowing that brought Peter's sin into the light, so that then he could find his restoration on that beach beautifully with Jesus. Another wonderful biblical story which highlights this very, very clearly. Think about King David, a man after God's own heart, yet the one who goes after a married woman, Bathsheba, and then when he gets caught out, when she gets pregnant, he arranges for her husband to be killed in war. Blind to his behaviour, and it takes the prophet Nathan to come along and tell him a parable about this rich man who had all the sheep in the world. A visitor comes along, he spots a sheep belonging to a poor man, and he has that killed for the feast. It's a summary of what happened with Bathsheba, and David's eyes were opened up to the truth. Again, Nathan spoke in parable because we can be very, very blind to our own behaviour. When I was a probation officer, I found so much resistance to change. In fact, in prison sometimes it was really hard to find anybody who was guilty, who admitted to it. There was so much resistance to being eye-opening to their own behaviour, to their offending behaviour and to related issues that were linked to it: drink, drugs, gambling, anger. If, as a probation officer, you went head-on, you would just come against a brick wall. You'd get resistance. A few times, and it was a few times in 16 years, a few times there was a breakthrough, but that always happened when somebody wanted to see. Often took place when their own personal sorrow had become too much, or the results of their behaviour had gone on for too long, when relationships broke down, when they were no longer able to see their children, when they had a liver scan that said, no, you have got cirrhosis, you need to do something. Or sometimes the awareness came and the change came and something was done about the sorrow when they recognised the sorrow they called to others.